All right, good evening, everyone. For some of you, good morning, and others, good afternoon. My name is Jim Selby. I'm with Service to School. And before we get started, just a couple admin notes. A reminder that we're taping this event, so please feel free to go dark if you'd like to. And please use our Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for any questions you'll have. The Service to School team will be monitoring those as we go, and then we'll bring those questions to the forefront when we get to the end. Really looking forward to all that we're going to learn tonight, not just about writing a college admissions essay, but how the essays fit into all the other factors that are considered by college admissions committee. Also looking forward to learning more about how to approach the personal statement versus a short answer response, as well as techniques to consider and what to pay particular attention to. So, as they often say, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Lisa Rielage, our great friend to Service to School, a fellow veteran, one of our ambassadors, and a college admissions consultant. So expertise from days on end coming to the table. Lisa, thank you and welcome aboard.
Thank you, everybody. And welcome. I appreciate everybody spending a little bit of their day with me. I won't be able to answer every question. There we go. I won't be able to answer every question that folks have about essays, but I do hope that I can clear up a few misunderstandings, give you a sense of how essays are used by the admissions offices, how to get started writing, and how to also make your essay a little stronger. You're going to have to indulge me. I've stuck a number of Navy photos into this slide deck. This is my second ship taking heavy seas while replenishing the aircraft carrier John F. Kennedy. And I picked this one because I think for me, it demonstrates the sense of being at sea, heavy rolls, heavy waves, not really knowing where to go, and feeling a little queasy about the idea of working on an essay. So writing essays often feels both difficult and really vulnerable. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. The essay format is a style that we tend not to use in our writing, our everyday work. So where we might be writing reports that stay very neutral, are in third person, talk about this happened, sequential order, the personal narrative is all about me. It's what I did, it's what happened to me, it's how I overcame challenges. And that's a little more personal than what our writing habits tend to be. Because it's personal, it brings out emotional responses. You may be revisiting events that you haven't really finished processing. The stories you choose to tell could be hard to write about. They might feel uncomfortable to share. They might make you feel a little bit embarrassed. And finally, the consequences feel like there's a lot of risk to the choices that you make in the writing process. Your essay might make you feel a little inadequate. It might make you visit the imposter syndrome a little bit. It's good to remember that essays are an important part of your application, but they're only one part. There's a lot of other things that are going to be considered, and your essay is not going to be the single thing that gets you into a college in most circumstances. Content and style both matter, but if you had to choose one, it's better to have really solid and meaningful content that is written in a workmanlike, straightforward way. That would be better than to have really beautiful writing that didn't really say a whole lot. So work on your content first before you jazz it up. I'd also like to normalize this feeling of being judged that you may have. This is just an intrinsic part of putting yourself on the line with the college application. You're putting together your best package of who you are. The numbers may seem really inadequate to describe the fullness that is you, your authentic self. And then you're sending it to strangers halfway across the country who are going to review it in 5 to 15 minutes and make decisions that'll affect where you go to school and what you do in your future. So of course, you're feeling like a lot is riding on this. So don't feel that you are alone in feeling judged. On the other hand, I want you to have confidence as you approach your writing. Remember, first, that the admissions decisions are based on a lot of factors. Secondly, that you're bringing a lot to the table. You are not 17. You are not sitting in your high school English class writing this essay. You have life experiences that teenagers can only dream about having, and that is worth sharing with the admissions office for them to base their decisions on. Also keep in mind that a turn down letter is not all about you. It's going to feel like it is. It's going to feel really, really critical. But many turn down letters are based on institutional priorities at the college, sometimes just on sheer numbers. This year in particular, a lot of the highly selective colleges are having increases of 20, 50%. Colgate had 100% more applications this year than they received last year. And the number of seats that they have at these schools haven't gone up. So, of course, many high quality applicants are going to be told that there's not a spot for them. So let's talk a little bit now about what a college considers when it's making an application decision. These first 4 items are about your academic record, and they are traditionally the most important thing that a college will use in an admissions decision. Essays and letters of recommendation aren't just numbers. They're more of a narrative style telling the story behind the numbers. And the essay is important because it's the only one that you really control the content and the delivery of. These are secondary factors that go into admissions decisions. Some of them are used more at certain schools than others. And in general, a college that is able to do a holistic admissions review rather than looking just at test scores and grades is more likely to consider these extra factors. The ones that I highlighted in blue are bolded because they are items that you might choose to touch upon in one of your essays that you write. So, for example, if you're a first-generation student, there might be a place for that in the essay that you're writing. If you have work experience, which all of us bring as veterans, if you have extracurricular experiences or other life experiences, this is something that you can put into the essay and give context to the rest of the material that they're getting. So let's think about essays from the point of view of the admissions office for a minute. What are they hoping to achieve by tasking you with these essays? Just keep in mind, they're having to pay not just one, but a great number of people to read all of the essays they're soliciting. So they have to get something purposeful out of it, or it's not worth their effort, time, and money. What the essay does is provide context to the academic record. It makes you a three-dimensional real-life person. It's an opportunity for you to describe challenges that you've overcome and items of personal growth. And I think that's key for us as non-traditional students. We're older, we have work experience, many of us have families. We are not who we were as teenagers. This is especially true of folks who maybe accrued a little bit of credit along the way or did some college work, went in the military, and are now approaching college for a second time. Talk about that personal growth arc. The essay is not, to quote one of my old bosses, it might heal the sick, but it's not going to raise the dead. So an essay is likely to tip the scales when there's already some compelling evidence for you as an applicant. But if you're really not matching the typical applicant pool for a school, if normally they take 4.0 students and you're a 2.0 applicant, it's going to be hard for an essay to do that amount of heavy lifting. The final thing about an essay, because it needs to provide context about you, about your experience, it needs to be unmistakably about you, the applicant. and we'll talk about this several times in this workshop, but if you could put your buddy's name on your essay and it would be equally true, then you're not done writing it. You need to make it clearly about your experience and what you're bringing to the table. So I want to talk about some of the different types of essays that you're likely to be either tasked with writing or have the opportunity to respond to. A lot of colleges use a common application portal. About 900 schools use this. And what you get as the applicant out of using the common application is that the baseline information that you put in, what your school record is, where you attended, what your GPA was, what your activities were, and what you got out of them, and your main essay, those get attached to your umbrella file, if you will. And then every college that you apply to through the Common App downloads that without you having to send it individually to them. So there's 3 free responses in that overall section of the Common App. The first one is typically called the personal statement or the long essay. And there are, I think, 7 different prompts. The prompts aren't as important as you might think. They're not really a question you're answering. They are to get you thinking about a response. In fact, the last option is, or any other essay you would like to provide. So really, you've got a wild card there to provide the answer that best explains you. You need to talk about what makes you unique, what your values are, what your career goals are. Keep in mind that this essay has the potential to be downloaded by multiple colleges. So don't spend time in this essay identifying with one specific school. If you mention how much you love Tulane and live and breathe the opportunity to go to school in New Orleans, and then you also send that same essay to Case Western and College of Wooster, guess who's probably not sending you an admit letter? 2 other sections that are in the overall portion of the Common Application are an additional information section, and then what's commonly being called a COVID-19 supplement. These are areas where you can divert from an essay with a beginning, middle, and end format and give a little more truncated, bulleted type format and explain specific items that need clarification within your record. So if, for example, you have in your academic record a class that you were taking part-time while you were in the military and you had all of a sudden a deployment order and you were unable to withdraw on time, that's something you might clarify in the additional information section. You might also give a little bit of clarity to academic experiences that you had in the military that don't necessarily show up on a transcript. So if you've gone to longer training schools and let's say you weren't a high GPA student in high school, but you were the honor graduate from your MOS training, that's perhaps worth noting. The COVID-19 supplement actually is a place where you can address not only coronavirus, but other natural disasters that had an effect on your ability to maintain your education or other items that affected what was going on in your life that could have had a secondary impact on grades and your academic record. So things that I'm thinking of that might go in here, if you had a ROM period, what the Navy is calling restriction of movement, or if you had a deployment schedule that changed, work responsibilities, or alternatively, if you've been out of the service for a while and because of coronavirus or something else that happened, you now have family responsibilities you didn't plan on that have gotten in the way of your academics. This is something that you can explain in this section. So if you think of the Common Application as having that overall section, and then it has streamers that come down, and those streamers are the individual colleges that you are applying to. each college that uses Common Application has the opportunity to add their own school-specific questions. Some of them may ask just very yes, no. Do you have a relative who went to this school? Are you a resident of this state? There is also an opportunity for them to add in other essay questions. And so something I recommend if you're using Common Application, add in all the colleges you want to apply to, and then check for the supplemental questions that they might be asking. Because there's nothing worse than finding out 3 minutes before you want to hit submit that you have 2 or 3 more essays to write. So supplemental questions run a whole gamut. They might be looking for information about your fit in the campus community. They might want to ask questions about why you're applying to a particular major or to a particular program and department. Or they might ask questions about your background, your identity, things that are important to you, when you challenged something you thought was wrong, a course that you would like to invent and take at the university. It's other ways of trying to draw out from you what's important, what makes you interesting and unique. A specific type of supplemental question that you'll often encounter is a why us question. These are an example of colleges wanting to find out why you really like them. Why do you want to apply to Georgia Tech, for example? And how, in your mind, are they different from these other schools that you might be applying to? No one wants to be the school that you've added just because it's on a list of top 10 or 20 schools. They want to know that you've spent time to know what makes them interesting, what would provide you opportunities at their school. They want you to reflect that back a bit and connect it with why it's a good place for you. These YS essays are particularly significant at schools that use demonstrated interest as part of their admissions decision-making process. For transfer students, within the Common Application, there used to be a completely separate transfer prompt. Now they use the same general prompts that first-time freshmen would use. But it's really common that a college will add a why are you coming to us? Why do you want to come to us? Supplement for transfer students. So that for most transfer students, the expectation is that they're sitting at some college right now. You're at Oregon State University and you want to go to Boise State. Why is that? Or that you're at a junior college or community college and moving on to a four-year school. What do you hope to get out of that experience? If you're a veteran and you're applying transfer because you have credits that you've racked up in the course of your military experience or before you join the military, you might not be applying from a position of being in college right now. So ignore any part that is, implying why are you leaving the school you're at right now, and just talk about what do you hope to get out of this new situation. And then there's some other quirky questions that you might encounter. University of Chicago has a reputation for really unusual questions. Some schools will have some pretty short questions. Again, they're just looking for a little bit of a more authentic and natural reaction from you. So before you get started writing, you need to know what you're going to be saying. It's really intimidating to sit in front of a blank sheet of paper or in front of a blank screen with that cursor blinking at you. So what I would suggest is that you spend some time first deciding the points that you want to make. There's an old game, if you really knew me, you would know that. Think about that for a little bit. What do the people who know you best know about you? You might consider going through the VetLink addendum. Even if you're not applying to a VetLink school, this can be a useful exercise to help you get down on paper where you've been, what you've done, your leadership experiences, the education, the awards that you earned in the military. If you've been out for a bit, A resume might be a more natural way of collecting that information. But either one of those can help you collect your thoughts, and probably along the way, oh, there was that time that this thing happened. You might start collecting some of the stories that are going to best display what your characteristics are. How do you decide what characteristics you want to display? Values exercise is a good way of going through that. In the next slide, I'll dive into it a little bit more. But in general, what you're wanting to do here is figure out the story you want to tell to the admissions office. What do you want them to know about you? And across your whole application, how do they get those pieces? These are a few more pre-writing prompts that you might find useful. You've got an I love me wall. What's on it and why? What's it signify for you? I used to carry around in my working jacket a little chip of wood. That chip of wood was from half of a chip I threw overboard the first time I was anchoring a ship, which was a major ship handling evolution for me as a division officer. And I kept that because it reminded me of a moment where I felt challenged, but also especially capable, and that I was coming into my own professionally. No one else would understand why I had it. Kind of a old and ratty looking piece of wood in my pocket. But for me, it was really meaningful. So I mentioned the idea of a values exercise. This sheet is one from Brene Brown, who speaks and writes a lot about values exercises. But if you just search for values exercise, you can find other examples of these. The idea is that it's to help you clarify and articulate what is important to you, because we don't all have the same list of things that are really essential values. So here's how you would handle this. Print out one of the lists that you come up with. Go through and put a tick mark next to every characteristic that strikes a chord with you. There might be a couple of dozen. And then I want you to go back a second time, and I want you to circle the 10 most important traits. Once you've done that, I want you to write down the 3 traits that are really the 3 key traits for you from that list. And then if possible, I want you to underline the single trait that is really the most essential one for you. What this can do for you and your essay writing is give you an idea of the values, the characteristics, the strengths that you want to get across to the admissions reader. So if, for example, I was writing about ethics and why ethics are a core value for me, I might pick instances where my ethics were challenged, when I had to do the hard right thing, even though there was a personal cost for me, or why going to college would further equip me for pursuing more ethical work. On the other hand, if serenity was one of my key values, then maybe the examples that I would be choosing would be examples when I was in the midst of a lot of chaos, but found an inner calm. What were the methods that I used to find that inner calm? Maybe it wasn't something that came easy to me. You know, when I was first in the Navy, I was a big ball cap thrower. I could wing it all the way across the engineering log room. And it's only with years and years of practice that I've managed to calm myself down a lot. So perhaps that's a story that I would tell if serenity were one of my key values. And your key values may not be the same as mine. And what was important to you 5, 10 years ago might not be the things that are important to you now. So this is just one way that you can clarify for yourself what you want to try to communicate in your essay writing. Okay, so there's a little bit of strategizing here. As you're collecting the information on the essays that you need to produce, I recommend that you make a master sheet. what's the point of the essay? What is it a why us essay? Is it a why this major essay? Is it a personal statement? Is there something else? Take note of what the word limits are. Some schools, especially regional state schools, will use character limits instead of word limits if they're using their own proprietary application. So be aware of which it is. If there's no indication on the application of a word limit or a character limit, what you can do is paste in some large block of text and check and see if it cuts it off in the middle. And then in another column, you can write down what episodes, what stories, what descriptions you are going to use to address that prompt. And then think to yourself, can I group any of these together? For example, if you have 3 different universities that are asking, why do you want to study this major? Well, you're going to be describing to each school why you want to study mechanical engineering or history or physics. Those answers could be pretty similar from school to school. You might pick the one that has the medium word count, and then for the one that's bigger, you expand it a little bit. For the one that's smaller, you do a little bit of editing. It's okay to use the same instances, to use the same writing across multiple colleges. Don't tell the same story 3 and 4 times to the same school, but it is okay to tell Purdue and CU Boulder and University of Alabama Huntsville the same story about why mechanical engineering makes your heart go pitter patter. So when we get down to actually writing, you know what you're going to write about. You have your word count target, and you've done some brainstorming of the episodes you want to talk about. Chronological versus montage. Chronological works well if there's a single story that you're telling, especially if, for example, there's a challenge that you've needed to overcome. So it's one big episode, what the conflict was, how you resolved it, what you learned from it. Montage is sort of a screenwriting idea. So if you remember Rocky, if you're older, like Jim and I, or Incredibles, if you're from a younger generation, there's some sequence where the hero is training for this great thing that's going to happen. And they're punching sides of beef, and they're running up the stairs of the city hall, or they're deadlifting cars in the driveway. They're not necessarily connected sequentially, but they're connected by a theme. And you can use this if what you're writing about doesn't have a clear beginning to end sequence, but you have several episodes that are demonstrating the characteristics and what you're trying to head for. When I talk about a zero draft, what I mean here is something that is so fundamental and basic that it's not even as good as a first draft yet. You need to completely turn off your internal editor and put words on paper. And it's okay at the end of that if you look back and there's only one paragraph that works for you. Maybe there's only one sentence that works for you. Keep the part that works and build on that without internal reproach. That's what the zero draft is. It is a criticism-free zone. Just get words down because you have to start at some point. It is more effective to demonstrate through an episode a character in action, a characteristic in action, than to say, I'm kind or I am ethical. So that's what show don't tell is. You are demonstrating through an experience that a trait exists. I like to have people start writing kind of in the middle of their essay. Start telling that story before you try to get the perfect opening sentence. There's 2 reasons for that. One, trying to craft that perfect opener really tends to stall us out. And the second issue is you may find over the course of time that the incidents you're using, what your middle is, tend to change a little bit. And if you've crafted that perfect beginning and then you change the middle, that perfect beginning may not fit anymore. So put pause on writing the perfect opener until you know what it's opening into. When you review what you've written, consider, does it contribute to the whole, and does it convey a truth about your values, about the elements you're trying to convey? If it doesn't work towards the final point that you're trying to make, it's okay to leave it out. And then the final is a real practical tip. Just never do this writing in the college application itself. High use college applications like University of California, their servers tend to crash because everybody's in on them at the same time. They time out, you lose your work, you cry, you think, I'm never going to apply to college, this just isn't worth it. Write it in Word, write it in Google Docs. You have their spell check, word count, the ability to cut and paste. It's much easier to manipulate your words, your document, and then paste it into the actual college application. So before I go on to editing, I want to talk about one other item. In the process of collecting the episodes that you're going to write about, you may find that you are revisiting in your head some moments when you've experienced trauma. And trauma isn't only something you experienced in combat or in a high-stress military environment. It could be something from your domestic relationships. It could be something from your childhood. It could be physical, emotional, psychological trauma. You have the authority to decide whether or not you include these episodes in an essay and how you use them. So I want to make sure to acknowledge that it can be emotionally triggering, but also that you have the agency and authority to decide what you write and how you use it. So you might decide, this is an essential component to my story and I am ready to tell it, let's go. Or you might decide, there is no way that story is going into my essay. I don't want to even think about it, and I'm sure not sharing it with some stranger. Or you might have a middle road where maybe I will and maybe I won't, but I need some help with it. This is something your ambassador may be able to assist with, or you may find that you need to find a trusted friend, a family member, somebody that you served with, someone who knows you well and can help you work through this process. It's possible that you're going to get this all down on paper, and then you're going to realize it really doesn't fit in an essay that well. That's also okay. It can be that it's beneficial to us to just get it down on paper, that it helps us to process what the experience was, but maybe it doesn't really serve us well as part of the college application process. And I want to acknowledge that this way of thinking through how you deal with traumatic incidents in an essay is from Ashley Lipscomb, who's the CEO of the Institute for Anti-Racist Education. And I really appreciate her work in this area. Once you have things written down, then it's time to do some revision. You might feel like you're not a good writer, but it's really important to realize that good writers aren't just people who are really good with words. They are also people who take a lot of time to revise what they write and to find just the right way of saying what they're saying. You may need to spend longer on revision than on the first draft. In fact, I'd say that's likely. I recommend that you revise over the course of several days. It gives you time to work on it, set it aside, come back when you're emotionally fresh, when it doesn't swim in front of your eyes because you've been staring at it for so long. What that means is you need to set your timelines in such a way that you give yourself sufficient time to do that revision. Don't sit down for your first time the day before it's due. The number one tip that I have for revision is to print out a copy of your essay in a larger font than you're used to reading on the screen and read it out loud. This might feel foolish and awkward, but do it anyway. The reason for this is that our eyes view things differently on the screen than they do when it's on paper. So you will catch errors that you would not notice if you were scanning through it on the screen. Reading it out loud incorporates your speaking and also your hearing, and that allows you to catch awkward phrasing or subject-verb agreement that isn't correct, run-on sentences, and especially words that spell check didn't catch because they were a correct word in some spelling, but not the right word. And if you want to read it to someone, that's great. Sometimes when I'm working with a mentee, I'll read it to them or I'll have them read it out loud to me. But even if you just lock yourself in the bathroom with the fan on and read it out loud to yourself, this is really a key trick to use to get your revision right. And things I see as common issues. One is just restating the prompt. If the prompt is, why do you want to study the major that you've applied for? You don't need to start out the essay. I would like to study mechanical engineering because. They understand that's the question you're answering. So launch into your explanation of the why, maybe save that, and therefore mechanical engineering is perfect for me for your conclusion. Word count or character count, these are hard limits. The worst case scenario is you'll paste it in, it'll look like it's all there, but the last 50 words that went over just get cut off and don't go to the admissions office. Avoid writing that is vague or generic. Make sure that you're choosing examples that are explicit, they're clear, and they only apply to you, or they very clearly apply to you. Jargon or mil-speak is something that I think we are especially prone to. If you've spent time in a joint environment working with members of another service, then you probably realize that even across different parts of the military, we don't necessarily use acronyms the same way. And your poor admissions reader, who is likely to have no time in the military, has no chance at understanding these. This first item here of being too broad or not enough detail, I think Jim used the phrase 31 flavors last time we were talking. The idea that you have so many instances or episodes that you're including in an essay that you don't have time to go into detail on them. So don't pick too many. 2 or 3 is probably sufficient. 1 might be enough. And remember that you are applying to the college. The military isn't applying to the college. Your last ship or squadron is not applying. So don't overly describe the military when what ought to be described is you. And the last item, a lot of us have stumbling blocks to where we've been, what we are hoping to achieve, but don't fall in the trap of coming across as a victim. It's okay to explain, but don't make everything somebody else's fault. As far as grammar goes, back at the beginning, I talked about content being king, that it's more important to have good examples and be about you than be beautiful writing. But strong word choice can really help you. Take out unnecessary words. Very unique is 2 words where 1 is enough. Unique is unique. It's a single thing. Don't use an overly complicated sentence structure. My rule of thumb for my students, if a sentence extends over 2 lines, it might be too long. Just look at it. If you have more than 2 clauses in a sentence, if there's 2 ands and a but and an or, it's probably a run-on. It might be better, more compelling if you can break it into multiple sentences. If you're unsure about your grammar and your writing style, Purdue OWL is a free grammar and writing resource. If you're currently taking classes, Purdue is a really great resource for how to footnote, how to do a bibliography, but it also will break down to how to do clear sentences, how to write a thesis statement, how to do good paragraphs. So parallelism and passive voice, we're going to up your game just a little bit. Parallelism is the idea that in a sequence, the items that are in the list should be the same type of speech, basically at the same level. So instead of saying, I joined the Navy for travel, to have adventures, and learning some good skills, which are three different parts of speech, a noun, an infinitive, and a gerund. Instead, let's use three nouns. I joined the Navy for travel, adventure, and education. Passive voice is when the subject of a sentence has something happening to it instead of being the actor in the sentence. In my example here, I also threw in a little bit of mil-speak, some jargon that is probably not understandable unless you were in the Navy like 25 years ago. So instead of saying we were tasked by a land fleet with doing narc ops, you might say we crisscrossed. So now the we is doing the action instead of having it done to them. We crisscrossed the Caribbean hunting elusive drug shipments. Passive voice might be appropriate to emphasize that an action did happen to something else, but use it with caution. There might be a stronger way of phrasing that sentence. These are some resources that I think might help you. Ethan Sawyer has a treasure trove of college essay writing advice, almost all of which is free to applicants. So I recommend him. He's really good for college-specific supplements and for getting you going on the writing process. Brene Brown is where the values exercise that I profiled earlier is from. And then down at the bottom, Johns Hopkins University every year does about a half dozen essays that worked on their website, and you can pull previous year's examples as well. I like this resource because they post not only the essay, but why they thought the essay was compelling, why it worked for them. Don't copy somebody else's essay, but I think getting that behind the scenes glimpse of why something conveyed a student's situation well can help prime the pump a little bit. And then these last three examples, the first one's a speech. Then Adam Driver, who plays Kylo Ren in Star Wars, he did a TED Talk about his transition from being a military, I think he was a truck mechanic, to being an actor. And then this last one is an editorial that was in the Stanford student newspaper last year. What I liked about these is that in each instance, they took military experience and tied it to either a lessons learned or their academic experience. And I thought that they could serve as good examples of how you can take something that's very far removed from sitting in a college learning something, but demonstrate why that military experience may have prepared you for the scholastic experience that you are hoping to embark on. This is my second favorite Navy photo. This is me many years ago lighting off a 1,200-pound steam boiler on USS Jesse L. Brown. And I hope that this workshop has done a little bit to light a fire in you, to make you feel less apprehensive about the essay writing process, to give you some ideas of what you can include in your essays, how they're going to be read by admissions offices, and how to make your writing a little more compelling. And with that, I will stop my screen share and turn it back to Jim.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to go right into Q&A so we can make sure to get to everyone's questions and answers. Could you talk again about the montage outline? One of our participants is actually starting to sense that that's something that they're feeling themselves as they're going through their own essay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let me give you an example of one that a student I was working with wrote. So he is intending to do mechanical engineering, has applied to half a dozen colleges, and doesn't have like a big struggle he has overcome, a big challenge. So he used a montage of writing about 3 different things he's made So it was a clock, a Settlers of Catan board, and I think maybe there was some origami was the third one. But each one he used to demonstrate a different aspect of his innovation and creativity and qualities that he intends to bring to engineering. He has kind of a creative artistic bent, but also in a tinkering way. So that's how he used montage to focus on three different aspects, talents he thinks he's going to bring that will make him an effective engineer.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. And earlier you had talked about, when to write the hook, when to really put the focus on the hook. And I found that really interesting because I tend to do just the opposite. I got to get this hook right before I even start articulating, the rest of my story. Could you just re-emphasize that for us?
Yeah, so just, I think we want it to be so captivating. And when we read something in the newspaper, we read a magazine article that really pulls us in, that lead, it is compelling. But that lead is often not the first thing that was written. You're reading it not in the same sequence that the author wrote it. And that's easy to miss. So decide what you're saying first. Write that middle portion, the body of the essay. Then write the hook that brings the reader to that point. It's okay to have in mind, this is this compelling phrase. That's totally okay. But just don't sit and obsess over getting the intro right before you move on. Messy middles are okay.
Very good. Talk a little bit more, if you would, about this idea that it's cut and paste. You want to avoid an essay where you could put your buddy's name in and it would be the same essay.
Okay, so when I wrote, I used to teach a literary analysis class, and I talked to them about the Charlotte's Web test. And the Charlotte's Web test is if they hand me a literary analysis paper of Jane Eyre or Beloved or A Christmas Carol, and I can substitute in Charlotte's Web everywhere the title of the book showed up, and the literary analysis makes just as much sense, then it wasn't really about the thing they were writing about. It's too vague. So you ought to be able to leave your paper on the desk, your buddies see it, there's no name on it, but they know it's you because you're the only one that those things could describe. So that's what I mean by being too vague. It's the difference between writing about ships and writing about Jesse L. Brown, about writing in the Navy and versus writing about being boilers officer or damage control assistant. We have, even if people who were in the same branch of service at the same time, we still have really different experiences. And, I was in the Navy, and Jim, I think you were Army. Our experiences are super different. Someone who's serving now and transitioning out has a really different experience than I did serving between the Cold War and global war on terror. So you're a unique person, unique set of circumstances, play with that.
Lisa, I love you, but I'm a Marine.
Oh, I got it wrong.
Okay. I don't have any other questions queued up. I don't know if those of you that have joined us are able to unmute. If you have if so, feel free to go ahead and unmute and bring any questions forward.
I have a question, please.
Edwin, how are you? Good to see you.
How you doing, Masson? I'm doing well. So I'm finalizing my essays for Princeton.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping, ma'am, if, I don't know if you, a third set of eyes will be interested in looking at my essays.
I can look them over. Jim, can you help that happen?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or I can email you, Masson, and we can work together with.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Mm-hmm. That's fine.
So since we've got a few minutes, let me give another trick for coming up with ideas. This is one I'm borrowing from Ethan Sawyer, who has the website College Essay Guy, and he talks about something called an essence objects exercise. So what he suggests is that you think of a box, metaphorical box, doesn't have to actually exist. And mentally in that box, place objects that represent key parts of you. You know, I think I alluded to this with the I love me wall, but those are things that somebody else picked for you. What would you pick that epitomizes you, that really stands for some part of your experience? You know, for me, it's that wood chip. It's a piece of the Berlin Wall that I have that a friend chipped out of the Berlin Wall for me in 1990. And I'd visited Berlin twice before the wall came down. I studied German in college. For me, having that piece of wall that kept me out of East Berlin and then just disappeared in the course of about 9 months, that's huge for me. I have I don't know how many folks are old enough here to have kids of their own, but I have a little baby sock that one of my kids wore. And it probably would barely fit on his thumb now. And I have kept that around. It's been especially good in moments when I was a little bit annoyed with him, to remember that connection that I have with him, that even when he is annoying me and grating on my nerves a bit, he is still that kid I loved unreservedly. And it's just a sock that reminds me of that. For Ethan Sawyer, for him, there's a family Bible. There's a friendship bracelet that his wife makes every year. He has a green pen that represents the editorial work he does helping students with essays. So what are the things that represent your life? And we are service to school, and we're a lot about helping veterans with their applications, but our lives are not solely bounded by our military experience. We've got time before, we've got all our after hours time. Just because we're wearing a uniform doesn't mean that's the totality of who we are. And if you've been out for a bit, you've got that life experience too. So it's also completely fine to write about things that are not the military.
So Lisa, one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. One of the more common questions that are asked of transfer applicants are, why are you transferring?
Mm-hmm.
And a direction that many take, and I think it's a good direction, is focusing on why they're transferring to that particular school.
Mm-hmm.
But what we see often is, I want to be surrounded by like-minded individuals, the brightest and the best. What we're not seeing is, what is it specific about that particular school?
Mm-hmm.
So could you talk about, how do you go about identifying, articulating why you're transferring to that particular school?
So first off, I'm going to say you need to have some good reasons. And the reason probably isn't because I saw it on the front page of the New York Times, or it was in the latest US News and World Report ranking. Because they're pretty shallow reasons that are going to apply to almost any applicant. So what's your actual reason? If you're applying to Georgia Tech for computer science, maybe it's because you heard that they've got a Threads program where you don't have to pick just one specialty with computer science, but they actually require you to study 2 computer science threads that are related but different. And you're really thrilled with the idea of studying both cybersecurity and game design. And it's one of the only schools you can go to where you don't have to pick. You can study both of them, and it's baked in the cake. Maybe you really want to go to University of Cincinnati because their engineering program has been doing co-ops as part of the engineering education for the last 110 years. And they invented the idea of co-oping in the US. And you really, really want to go to a school where It's not just a maybe if you ask right and the stars align perfectly, but where you know you're going to get 2 or 3 different opportunities to co-op before you graduate. Maybe it's because you really, really want to have the experience of studying a great books curriculum. But the point is, you're not going to go to Georgia Tech and study the great books curriculum in the computer science department. That's going to be something that is intrinsic to maybe going to Columbia or St. John's in Annapolis or Santa Fe. So if you don't know enough about the school to differentiate why that school, then you need to hop on their website, hop on YouTube and see virtual tours, virtual admissions briefs. What is distinctive about that school that makes you long to go there?
And then Lisa, if you could send us home with a couple thoughts to ponder and have in our mind as we're writing. At some point, we got to decide, this is great, I'm ready to send. Yeah, I've done all I can. Let's get it, let's this thing sent. Yeah.
So have confidence in yourself and your journey and your story. Get what you can on paper, but realize it's never going to feel as polished as you wish it would, but you still have something meaningful to say, and hopefully you've said it. Do remember you're not 17 sitting at your mom's kitchen. Well, maybe you are at your mom's kitchen. I don't know. But you've got a life experience. Talk about it. Use that. It's a huge strength that we have as veteran applicants. So don't underestimate the power of that. And, you know, I think it's common when you talk to authors, people who are screenwriters, or they write articles, or they write books, all of them are dissatisfied with the final product. Most of them, when they come back years later and read something they wrote, they're like, oh my gosh, why did I put that down? Because we mature, we get better, and that's a good thing. Done is better than perfect. Because I talked about the word count being a hard stop. The deadlines are a hard stop also. And there is rarely sympathy for missing a deadline.
I don't know how we could end it any stronger than done is better than perfect. So hopefully that relieves some of your anxiety. Anyone has questions that come up later, you know how to get a hold of me or get a hold of Alex Nieves. We'll definitely get back to you on that. So thanks again, Lisa. I really appreciate it. Lisa put a lot of time in this. I know like she asked you to do with your essay, she didn't put this together in a couple hours.
I was revising this until 4:30 this afternoon.
Well, it was done and close enough to perfect, right? Outstanding. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you very much.